David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
All right, so this is where normally I'd put up the dozens of emails that I get saying things like, David, I can tell that you are a shill for Elizabeth Warren because when her polling goes up, you talk about it, but when her polling goes down, you don't talk about it. Or, David, I can tell you hate Bernie because when Bernie's polling goes up, you don't talk about it. And when Bernie's polling goes down, you gleefully talk about it. And of course, none of that's true. But when you look at the facts, the truth is we've had essentially 6 straight months of Bernie's polling going more or less nowhere. He was at 14 in late April, and he was at 14 3 weeks ago. Well, we've had 6 straight months of Elizabeth Warren's polling climbing from 8 in April to as high as 27 a couple of weeks ago. I just tell you what is happening. And for the first time in many months, Bernie's polling is showing signs of life. So is Pete Buttigieg's, but we'll get to that shortly. And it's happening at the expense of Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren. Let's look at the numbers, for which I am, of course, merely a humble messenger, not the pollster. As you can see at the top of the graph, declines for Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren. Joe Biden down about 2.5 points in the last 3 weeks. Elizabeth Warren also losing some momentum, down about 5 points in the last 3 weeks. Who is gaining in the last 3 weeks? Well, it's Bernie and also Pete Buttigieg. You see Bernie, the blue line, popping up from about 14 to now more than 17, a 3-point gain for Bernie. You also see the purple line on the graph. This is Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete from South Bend, Indiana, climbing from just about 4 points a couple of weeks ago, now polling about 7%. This is the highest Pete Buttigieg has polled since early May. Otherwise, things are basically unchanged. Kamala Harris continuing a more or less slow decline since early July. Everything else, really not much else going on with her. Andrew Yang still has his 2.5 average. Tulsi Gabbard has her 1.3 average. Beto still has around 2, and Klobuchar around 2. So what do we make of all this? Well, Bernie is still in it. That's what we make of it. Bernie's doing what he has to do if he wants a shot at this thing, gaining back some of the support that he lost all the way back in April when Joe Biden entered this race. If you were supporting Bernie, you should be pleased. He did what he had to do in the last 3 weeks, which is he picked up 3 points in 3 weeks. Now with the, debate number 5 coming up, he has to keep it going. And it's particularly important because we have this 5th debate coming up on November 20th. It is an opportunity, conceivably, hypothetically, for someone to make a big showing and make a gain in the polls. But as I said when I appeared on PBS a couple of weeks ago, the further into the primary we get, the less that there is to gain from having a good debate showing, because the candidates' positions are known, the candidates' personalities are known, the candidates' presences, that's a difficult word to say, their presences on the stage are known because they've been around for longer, and we've been watching a whole bunch of debates so far. So the further we get into this thing, the debates actually represent a potential liability. The debates represent an opportunity to do something wrong and to lose support in the polls. The downside of the debates becomes bigger as we get further into it, particularly because there is less time to make up for missteps, while the possibility of some big gain due to the debates diminishes. So that's just a reality. That's not about Bernie specifically. Now, for debate number 5, we have 9 people already qualified. We have Beto, Tulsi, and Julian Castro pending some of the requirements. So we could conceivably end up with 12 people on the debate stage again, which I guess it diminishes the speaking time for each person, which in a sense reduces the possibility that they make some major gaffe or faux pas and put their foot in their mouths. But once again, we are not going to get deep discussion about any issue, quite frankly, from a debate that has 12 people up on the stage. The qualification period for debate 5, which is on November 20th, ends on November 13th, a week before. So they basically have 2 weeks left to either be in or out, Beto Tulsi and Julian Castro. So we will see ultimately who makes that stage. Bernie Sanders, people who are following Bernie, supporting Bernie, should be pleased. A point a week. I mean, listen, Elizabeth Warren got to her peak of 27 point whatever it was, gaining about a point and a half to 2 points a month. So a point a week is a lot. We haven't had polls for about 5 days, and I'm guessing by tomorrow we'll have some new ones, and we will see how Bernie is doing there. Okay, one of the big criticisms or concerns, or really fake concerns from concern trolls about the Donald Trump impeachment inquiry has been the impeachment inquiry has not been formalized. There's no roadmap to what it is that Nancy Pelosi and Democrats are doing. And as a result, there is no due process afforded to Donald Trump. It's all bogus, but even that talking point is about to fall apart because the House is going to be voting on formalizing the roadmap and the next steps of the Trump impeachment inquiry, which is an increasingly popular impeachment inquiry with the American people, as we've been talking about for the last 3 weeks. We anticipate that this is going to be introduced today. Maybe it's already been introduced or even voted on by the time you watch this clip or listen to today's show. Will they be uniting under the umbrella of harassing Donald Trump? No. Will they officially announce the start of a witch hunt? Give me a break. This is a formal process which will spell out the rights that a president has during an impeachment inquiry. It will spell out the role that Donald Trump's attorneys can play and a bunch of other processes. So what's the real meaning of this? It is to set up a framework so that Trump can't, or at least would look stupid to continue insisting that this is a constitutionally invalid inquiry, that it's a violation of his due process. Trump has been pulling these stunts for a while now, and of course they're absurd. Impeachment inquiries by the House are constitutionally delineated, never mind valid, but still formally authorizing an inquiry with its guideposts and establishing what due process will look like is a good thing because we live in the United States and this is how we do things. Now, this is going to pressure Republicans to cooperate. It's not going to force them to cooperate. Congressman Ro Khanna, friend of the show, yesterday was saying this will further put pressure on Republicans to just cooperate with the inquiry. They may still be in the same place in 2 weeks, which is ignoring subpoenas for documents. And at that point, we will go back to what is very quickly becoming the most prominent and sort of foremost issue in this impeachment inquiry. Will Democrats at least attempt to enforce their investigative and subpoena power? Or will Republicans and Donald Trump get away with ignoring it all again and again and again? And ultimately, this is going to be another point in the process which will simply be spun by Trumpists. Trumpists are already saying, I saw them on Reddit this morning, why are all these steps and votes being put in place? It seems so forced. And consider the absurdity of this. First, they said, the problem is this thing's not formal enough. It's a wacky witch hunt. There's no limits. It's no holds barred. And now Democrats want to formalize it and put some limits and some structure around it. And those same Trumpists are saying, oh, this is so forced. Votes, delineating exactly this is just too much. It's too forced. This is why we can't listen to them. And this is why Democrats just need to do what they need to do. The point I'm anxiously awaiting are the public hearings, the evidence being released, the day after day tweet storms that no doubt Donald Trump will be going on, the possibility of, imagine Rudy Giuliani testifying, but you need to enforce subpoenas. Yes, Rudy, if you force him to show up, will say, I don't recall to every question. He will say on the advice of counsel, I am invoking my Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination or Fifth Amendment privilege. He will do all of those things, but you still need to enforce subpoenas or this entire thing ends up being just a pathetic waste of time. Don't make it a waste of time. Democrats, please don't make it a waste of time. And let me just readdress this point. A few people, even though I discussed this yesterday, I still got emails from people saying, David, Democrats can try to enforce subpoenas, but still nothing might happen. Okay, well, let's cross that bridge when we come to it. At least try to enforce the subpoenas by every legal and law enforcement means that is available to you. To say you're putting the cart before the horse, it's a big metaphor day. You're putting the cart before the horse to say it doesn't matter if Democrats try to enforce the subpoenas because Republicans will get away with ignoring them anyway. It's different to get away with ignoring them after Democrats have actually tried to enforce the subpoenas than merely to say Republicans got away with ignoring the request and nothing else happened. We are going to be following this. We will see really how this is all structured in the vote that Nancy Pelosi plans to put forward in the House of Representatives very, very soon. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at @DPacman. And while you're on Twitter following me, follow the show at David Pakman Show. We'll take a quick break and be back right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Wendy Zierfoss and Kingsley Magpok. Wendy and Kingsley, thank you so much for being David Pakman Show members. I really do appreciate your support. And I hope you'll stay with us 5 years like today's sustaining member of the day has done. Jason Miller, today's longtime sustainer of the day, with us almost 5 years. Thanks to all of you great folks. We will be extra counting on your support as we get into the bulk of the 2020 election, particularly the general election, where we will be hoping to expand and do all sorts of new things. But it will depend on audience support. Sign up in under a minute at joinpakman.com. Coupon code is available. This is 2020, all one word, all lowercase. It'll save you 40%. You still get all the good stuff, including daily access to the members-only bonus show, now hosted on Fridays by producer Pat. I'm still hosting Monday through Thursday. We have today a second story that serves as a really good case study in the propaganda cycles that are often started by President Trump, but then perpetuated by Fox News, which gets them into the ecosystem and generates these default reflexive talking points that we end up hearing for years from the Trumpist right, despite being completely wrong and free of any facts. And I'm going to explain this entire thing to you. We actually have a couple of propaganda cycle stories for you today. There is a White House national security official named Alexander Vindman. Vindman is a whistleblower. Vindman says he heard the phone call where Donald Trump pushed the Ukrainian president to investigate Trump's political opponents like Joe Biden. Vindman is set to testify before Congress, which is going to be extraordinarily explosive testimony. We are talking about Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, a vetted, that is, national security official, a military veteran. And Donald Trump has previously suggested that whistleblowers, the people going to the whistleblowers with information, that they are basically spies. And Donald Trump alluded to treason. He alluded to the execution of such treasonous spies. And last night on Fox News's Laura Ingraham program, a real doozy of a show, it was suggested that what Alexander Vindman did is espionage, and that Vindman might even be, I hope you're sitting for this one, a Ukrainian double agent. Check this out and pay attention to whether you recognize the person making this argument.
This is buried in the New York Times piece tonight, but I found it very interesting. He's a decorated colonel, by the way, in the Iraq War. But because Colonel Vindman emigrated from Ukraine along with his family when he was a child and is fluent in Ukrainian and Russian, Ukrainian officials sought advice from him about how to deal with Mr. Giuliani, though they typically communicated in English. Now, wait a second, John. Here we have a U.S. national security official who is advising Ukraine while working inside the White House, apparently against the president's interest, and usually they spoke in English. Isn't that kind of an interesting angle on this story?
I find that astounding, and some people might call that espionage. But it doesn't actually seem to add any new facts to what we know. If, in terms of, I think Alan raises a good point, is this a high crime and misdemeanor? Whether you have one person or 5 people all saying, well, we objected to what the president said with the president of Ukraine, we have the transcript of the call. We can all make our judgment. I don't see how this breaking news actually adds more facts to what we know about whether this is an impeachable offense or not.
So if the guy suggesting this looks familiar, that's John Yoo. He's the guy who imploded when questioned by the late John Conyers when asked whether he thinks that legally the president could have a suspect buried alive. And he does one of the greatest lawyer non-answers, maybe in congressional testimony history, where he says, I've never recommended to a president that they have a suspect buried alive. No, but Counselor Yoo, could the president do that? I don't know why any president would ever do that. I know lots of presidents, no president would do that. This is, for the young people in our audience, we're taking a brief departure from the whistleblower thing. This is a classic clip of Bush administration lawyer John Yoo. Check it out.
Is there anything, Professor Yoo, that the president could not order to be done to a suspect if he believed it necessary for national defense?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that goes back to the quote you just read, because...
No, I'm just asking you the question. Maybe it does or doesn't, but what do you think?
I think it's the same question that I was asked.
Well, what's the answer?
First, can I make clear, I'm not talking about...
And you don't have to make anything clear. Just answer the question, counsel.
I just want to make sure I'm not saying anything...
You don't have to worry about not saying... Just answer the question.
Okay. My thinking right now...
Yes, right now.
Okay. My thinking right now...
This moment.
Yes. This moment, Mr. Chairman, is that, first, the question you're posing...
What is the answer?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not trying to make you...
I get it. Okay.
Let me answer I will answer the question.
No, you're wasting my time. Look, counsel, we've all practiced law. Hold it. Could the president order a suspect buried alive?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think that I've ever...
I'm asking you that.
Given the advice that the president could bury somebody alive.
I didn't ask you if you ever gave him advice. I asked you, do you think the president could order a suspect buried alive?
Mr. Chairman, my view right now is that I don't think a president would, no American president would ever have to order that or feel it necessary to order that.
I think we understand the games that are being played.
Yeah, so that guy thinks that the whistleblower might be a spy Ukrainian double agent. Last week, I had a caller who said, wait, David, I thought Republicans were for military veterans. I thought they supported the troops. And I explained to you, that's only true when it serves their political goals. Here's a military veteran who they are smearing as a spy because it doesn't serve their political goals to say, hey, you know what? We respect the troops. We support the troops. And if this guy is a veteran of the American military, then maybe we should listen to what he has to say. Now, this may deliberately or accidentally get Lieutenant Colonel Vindman killed. This is serious stuff, what they are doing, okay? When you have someone that Donald Trump, who is looked up to as a deity by Trumpists, say the whistleblowers may be spies or treasonous, that's already endangering their lives. When you then perpetuate the propaganda on the echo chamber that is Fox News, with John Yoo saying, this guy could be a double agent, this guy could be working for Ukraine, you are literally endangering this man's life. Now, they are now, as predicted, shifting to attacking the whistleblower and the whistleblower's character to get their base fired up and to shift the focus off of what Trump did to how we found out about it. This is a very common tactic that, to be perfectly frank, is often employed by the left and the right. When you have a leak or a whistle being blown, if you like the content, you focus on the content. If you don't, you focus on how we found out about it. And isn't it terrible how this information went public? That the left and right does this. Vindman importantly, though, is blowing the whistle to protect our country against Donald Trump, who is putting our national security at risk, our sovereignty at risk. And the way that this fits into the propaganda cycle is that the Trumpists will chug this nonsense like it's being ladle fed to them, and it will become the go-to talking point. The whistleblower, you're talking about the spy Ukrainian double agent who is a treasonous whatever, charge him right away. Really dangerous times that we're living in. And this one is really simple to understand. Espionage has a very specific definition politically. Spying to obtain political and military information. Well, what do we mean by spying? Is just hearing something spying? No. Spying is work for a government or organization done by secretly collecting information about enemies or competitors. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman works for the U.S. and blew the whistle in the U.S. because he's worried about how Donald Trump is hurting the U.S. That's not espionage. That's not treason. It's none of the above. It's really important we understand it because they are putting people's lives at risk. Let's go now to part 2 of our study of how the Trumpian Fox News propaganda cycles work. This next story is a story that in a normal world, on a normal planet, would not be a story. But in the story of Donald Trump's 2019 reality, this is a very real story. Fox and Friends has been caught editing out and minimizing the booing and the chanting of "Lock 'em up" that took place during Donald Trump's brief appearance at Game 5 of the World Series over the weekend. So to remind you, yesterday I played for you a bunch of clips of Trump showing up in Washington, D.C. for Game 5 of the World Series, and the entire place booing him as soon as he appeared on screen, chanting "Lock 'em up," and Trump visibly grimacing when he realized that that's what's taking place. The real world is not the echo chamber filter bubble of his carefully curated rallies that he's been doing. We talked about that yesterday. Here is Fox and Friends yesterday with the booing notably missing. I'm going to do audio only here because there is footage in this video of of copywritten content. Major League Baseball is extraordinarily aggressive, so I'm just going to be doing audio here. Let's take a very quick listen to this.
Because the president and first lady were at the game last night. They got there right around the time that it started, and they stayed a pretty long time. They were greeted with mixed reaction, but they were out there smiling, waving to everybody, as you can see in the crowd. So that's what happened right around game time. Let's take it to the top of the second inning right now and show you some of that action. Alvarez hits a 2-run home run.
Yeah, so then they just get into highlights from the game. It was all great fun, and I love how she calls it mixed reaction, which might be true only in the most technical sense, but this was a crowd that was very hostile to the president of the United States. They did not want Donald Trump there. That is the sort of bigger truth that Fox and Friends can't or won't tell their audience. Reminder, this is what was going on yesterday.
Joined by the president and first lady of the United States.
And then, of course, the chants of "Lock him up" break out.
Lock him up! Lock him up! Lock him up! Lock him up! Lock him up!
Here's another part of the stadium also chanting "Lock him up." So this is not in and of itself the most important story, but it's a really important story to understand the propaganda cycle. This is the continuation of the propaganda cycle. Trump goes to the game. Nobody wants him there. They boo him. They chant "Lock him up." And Trump clearly notices. I mean, it's obvious that he notices. Then people say booing. I don't know. I saw the video this morning on Fox and Friends. I didn't see any booing. Anyone saying that there was booing must be spreading fake news. What terrible people. Donald Trump is right about all the problems with fake news out there. And meanwhile, you have Fox and Friends cutting out the booing, calling it mixed reaction. Trumpist enclaves on the internet say it was liberals who digitally added the booing that wasn't really there. And the cycle just continues and perpetuates itself. People were joking when this happened that this is exactly the way it would go. And it went exactly this way. Fox cuts out the booing and calls it mixed reaction, while Trumpists spread conspiracy theories that the booing was digitally inserted by evil fake news liberals. How stupid does Fox News think that their audience, actually, maybe that's not the right question to be asking. In any case, we have a problem here. The self-perpetuating propaganda cycle. I realized I was going in a direction that maybe is not the right direction to go in. We need to understand it, but we also need some way of fighting it. And unfortunately, the symbiotic relationship between Donald Trump's talking points and the unflinching followers that believe anything he says as if it were gospel, combined with Fox News and the right-wing media that help to foment and expand and signal boost these lies and disgusting, depraved talking points, makes it really difficult to fight against this stuff. And this is one of the things that is being pointed out by people who were following Watergate when it was going on and are following what is going on right now. That is one of the primary differences between Nixon in the 70s and Trump right now, which is that they both seem to have done impeachable things. They both are tampering with witnesses. They both are doing all of the same stuff. But Nixon didn't have something like Fox News and the right-wing media cycle and circus, which Donald Trump has to his benefit. And that may ultimately be the difference maker in preventing public opinion from completely turning against Donald Trump. We will see. Make sure you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show, and follow me on Instagram at david.pakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Hey, this is just amazing. As I like to say, you really can't write this stuff. Donald Trump's attorney, or we think he still may be his attorney, Rudy Giuliani, butt dialed a reporter and was overheard talking about how he needs cash and saying negative things about Joe and Hunter Biden. Now, a butt dial, of course, for those uninitiated, is when you have your mobile phone in your pocket and it unlocks and accidentally calls someone and they pick up and they say, hello, hello, but they just hear whatever conversation is taking place in the background or wherever the caller is. But the best part is that this wasn't just any butt dial. On October 16th, Rudy Giuliani butt dialed a reporter for NBC News named Rich Shapiro. Rudy had actually spoken to Shapiro earlier the same night, so it might have been like a redial of the most recent name or number in the call log. At 11:07 p.m., Rudy's phone calls Shapiro's. Shapiro was sleeping. It goes to voicemail, and a 3-minute long voicemail is left. Now, often 3 minutes is the maximum voicemail length before it automatically stops recording. That's at least the case with the David Pakman Show voicemail number. We have a lot of experience with people calling and hitting that max and then being cut off. Rudy was talking to someone else, and he was talking about needing cash. You hear Rudy say, let's get back to business. I gotta get you to get on Bahrain. Giuliani says at one point, the problem is we need some money. There's then 9 seconds of silence, and then Rudy Giuliani says we need a few $100,000. Rudy, during this butt dial voicemail, refers to Robert several times. That could be Robert Mangus. Robert Mangus is a lawyer who happens to be a registered agent on the behalf of the Turkish government. Rudy used to work for the same law firm until about a year ago. Also fascinatingly, this isn't even the first time that Rudy Giuliani has butt dialed the same reporter. Last time it happened, he was trash talking the Bidens. It was months ago, and he had said in the butt dial things like Biden has been trading in on his public office since he was a senator, going on to say about Hunter Biden, when he became vice president, the kid decided to go around the world and say, hire me because I'm Joe Biden's son. And most people wouldn't hire him because he had a drug problem. Also saying his son altogether made somewhere between 5 and 8 million. A 3 million transaction was laundered, which is illegal. As we've referred to before, this is stupid Watergate. Stupid Watergate. Their stupidity and incompetence are matched or exceeded only by the Trumpists who are gullible enough to think that everything is fine and everything is normal. I was thinking, people like to say, who would play Trump if a movie was made about this administration? Would it be Alec Baldwin or would it be somebody else? If you make a film about this administration, how do you do it in a way that doesn't appear to be a comedy, particularly for people decades from now who maybe hadn't lived through what it is that we are living through today? Why do I constantly have to double check to see if I'm reading The Onion or a satirical news website when I read about what it is that people associated with this administration are doing? How is Rudy Giuliani anyone's lawyer, never mind lawyer to the President of the United States of America? And so to be serious for a moment here, what we learn from this butt dial, what we learn from what this reporter heard in the voicemail that was left, is that the Rudy Giuliani being involved with trying to smear and go after the Biden stuff has been going on for many, many months. We've recently learned about this. We recently found out about the July 25 Ukraine phone call, which was just a few months ago. This has been going on at minimum since the beginning of 2019 or close to it, if not 2018 or even earlier. And the only thing that I want to know is the full extent of how deep Rudy Giuliani's involvement goes, because it is very clear that he is up to his eyeballs in this stuff. And we may never know, because no matter what subpoenas Rudy Giuliani gets, he may ignore them if Democrats don't actually enforce those subpoenas. I hope we will someday learn the full truth of it. I'm not optimistic that we will. I've said before that the issue of the minimum wage is a complicated issue. I've been asked before, would a $15 minimum wage nationally be good or bad for the economy? And the truth is that a lot of the answer depends on where you are measuring whether it's good or bad for the economy. And I've said this before. We could stick to talking points on this show and do black and white stuff, like everything is either very good or very bad. It's all good or all bad. That's not the reality. OK, so when we think about a $15 minimum wage in lower cost of living places, where a $15 minimum wage might be doubling the prevailing minimum wage, there could be negative effects in some ways in terms of the destabilizing effect that could have on the local job market, etc. That's a reality. On the other hand, in high cost of living places, a $15 minimum wage may not even be enough, number one. And number two, is unlikely to hurt the economy relative to how much it will help people afford their day-to-day lives and inject more money into the wallets of workers. So we've got to be thoughtful here. There are some who say raising the minimum wage has no negative impact, period. That's not true. I mean, that's just not true in all cases. Of course, there are people on the other side who say any increase to the minimum wage causes layoffs, it causes business closures, it will blow up the cost of everything because businesses will just raise prices in order to account for that. But of course, that also isn't true. Today, we have a new case study from New York City. New York City raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour a year ago. The restaurant industry, which is one of the ones that is often the focus of minimum wage increases, the restaurant industry is doing really well in New York City. Despite this, New York City restaurants have seen increased revenue, and they've also seen increased employment. Now, the way they've done it is that prices have gone up slightly at New York City restaurants. Detractors of the minimum wage will immediately say, whoa, whoa, whoa. If you raise prices, customers will stop going out to eat. The businesses will fail. They'll have to fire everybody, and the minimum wage increase will backfire. Hasn't happened. And you know why? Prices don't have to go up very much. Imagine that the minimum wage goes up, for example, 8%. And imagine that restaurants account for that by increasing food prices by 8%. Now, more than likely they wouldn't, because the labor costs are only part of what it costs to run a restaurant. So an 8% increase in wages would not even require an 8% increase in prices. But okay, imagine that wages go up 8%, food prices go up 8%. A $10 burger becomes $10.80. Now, I'm not going to write that off as nothing, but for most people, you're not going to go out to eat a different number of times because the burger goes from $10 to $10.80. This is the reality. I don't want to be insensitive. I'm not ignoring that 80 cents on a $10 meal can be meaningful to many people. But the reality is that for the most part, you're not going to drastically change your habits if your burger goes from $10 to $10.80. But on the other side of the ledger, everybody who works at the restaurant and gets a raise because of that minimum wage increase now has more money to go out to other restaurants and to patronize other businesses where they live. That is hugely stimulative to the economy overall. Now, there's no question that if the New York City economy starts to fail, because it's been a strong economy in New York City for the last year, if the New York City economy starts to fail, it will be bad for lots of people. It'll be bad for restaurants. It'll be bad for their workers. But in the economic environment in New York City of the last year, the minimum wage increase has been a very, very positive thing. Now, there are also trickle-up effects to having better paid workers other than just they have money to spend at local businesses. They are happier. They have a higher standard of living and thus are providing better service, which is good for the businesses. They may be able to afford living closer to work because they can afford it, or having a more reliable car to get to work becomes economically within reach, which makes them more reliable workers and helps the business. So it's really important to think about these changes systemically rather than myopically. This is not to pretend that the minimum wage can be increased endlessly, but no one is proposing that. This is a very common red herring on the right where they'll say, listen, if $15 an hour is better than 10, why not make the minimum wage $25 an hour or $100 an hour or $200 an hour? Then everybody will just have tons of money, right, liberals? Well, hold on a second. $100 an hour is not an equilibrium wage. $100 an hour is not a wage that is the logical living wage based on the cost of living of any particular place in the United States of America. It is a distraction, and it's really important not to fall for it. So my sort of view on the left discussing minimum wage increases is, number one, don't let them set the talking points that we have to argue against with stupid stuff like make the minimum wage $100 an hour if you just want people to make more money. That's stupid. That's not even worth discussing. But let's not be the ones that pretend that there is not another side to the ledger. Minimum wage increases have effects. They have trickle-up effects and they have trickle-down effects. We don't have to pretend that there's no risk to a minimum wage increase to be able to justify it as the right policy in many cases and in many instances. That's the approach I think that the left should have. And the more informed we are about case studies like the one we see in New York City, the better we will be able to defend the policies that we want to see. Let's take a quick break. Make sure to give The David Pakman Show a like on Facebook at facebook.com/David Pakman Show. Very quick break and back with much more right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, as many of you know, I am not a socialist. I am a social democrat. That probably doesn't come as a shock to people who have been watching this show or listening to the show for a while. Social democrats are capitalists in the sense that we're not trying to overthrow capitalism and replace it with socialism or Marxism or communism or some system in which there's no more private property, private businesses, etc. We recognize the many, many, many failings of capitalism, but we want to fix them. And one of the reasons that capitalism has to be fixed is that it doesn't work for tons of people. But the interesting thing about this is that if you want some form of capitalism to remain, you had better damn well fix it, because the longer and longer it goes without working for millions and millions and millions of people, it makes the system more at risk of being overthrown by some other system. This was the concept, in fact, of Marxism, that eventually there would be this uprising of the proletariat that would take down the bourgeoisie. Of course, it has not happened in the United States, but the worse capitalism is, the more likely that that becomes. That gets us to today's sort of news, which is that, case in point, there's a new poll which says 7 out of 10 millennials would vote for a socialist candidate. I do wonder whether the people responding to the poll actually know what socialism is, because it seems like lots of people talk about socialism and they don't actually know what it is. But let's assume for a second, just for the sake of discussion, because the analysis is still an interesting one. This poll was released yesterday. It finds 70% of millennials are either somewhat or extremely likely to vote for a socialist political candidate. 50% of millennials have a somewhat or very unfavorable view of capitalism, which is up from last year. Overall, capitalism is still viewed more favorably than other economic systems, 61% positive. But this is a very clear trend line. Even if many of these people are mixing up socialism and social democracy, the trend line is clear. And this is why social democrats who are for better regulated social capitalism need to fix capitalism. And by the way, not that I'm in the vulture capitalist, free market, laissez-faire type of camp. If you're a vulture capitalist and you want to keep some form of capitalism, this should be a wake-up call for you as well. This is why you need to be fixing capitalism with the socially democratic reforms that people on the left of the Democratic Party have been talking about for many years. The least damaging thing to a capitalist is to fix capitalism, or they risk some other system actually becoming something people really and truly want. You know, when Donald Trump says during his State of the Union, we will never be a socialist country. He doesn't know that, as I've said before. Things change in countries. They can change slowly. They can change more quickly than sometimes we believe is possible. But the reality is that there's no real risk right now of the U.S. becoming actually socialist. You know, college tuition paid through taxes is not socialism. Medicare for all isn't socialism. Gun control is not socialism. But the right has both successfully and unsuccessfully used the term socialism as an argument to attack these socially democratic policies. But eventually there's going to have to be some accounting, because as capitalism as we know it continues to fail more and more people and fail to provide a basic standard of living and allow these just sickening excesses of wealth to accumulate more and more and more at the top, millennials who see that system as failing them, why wouldn't they be open to some other system? They don't see all of the great things that capitalism is bringing them because it's arguably not brought them a lot of great things. So of course they're going to look at something else, because our version of capitalism is fundamentally broken. So if you really want to tout the benefits of capitalism, and by this I mean some of the main tenets, right? Private property, private business ownership, taxation, which tends to be progressive taxation, although, you know, different people argue about how progressive it should be. Lots of the things that we have. If you want to really make the case that it's working, you've got to make it work for more people. And that includes making sure no one drops below a certain standard of living. That includes cutting down on the corrosive influence of money in politics and in influence peddling. The data is increasingly clear on this. Something will have to be done, or other systems, even misunderstood systems. And this is why I said, you know, a lot of people don't know the difference, don't realize what socialism actually is. It doesn't matter, because no matter what your assessment is of what capitalism is and what socialism is, if people understand that the system as it exists is not working for them, it becomes harder and harder to argue that this is the system that we should keep. In the last 24 hours, and I believe I know why, I received 7 or 8 emails asking me to debate Charlie Kirk, okay? If you don't know who Charlie Kirk is, I admire you and I envy you. Charlie Kirk is a right-wing bomb thrower associated with the right-wing group Turning Point USA. The whole premise of Turning Point USA, as I understand it, is that the left has taken over our colleges, The left has taken over our universities. And so what TPUSA, or Toilet Paper USA, as some know it, does, is they go to colleges and universities and they spout their bogus talking points, and they'll argue with people in the crowd and, sort of Ben Shapiro-like, but not as rhetorically skilled as Ben Shapiro. Candace Owens is another person associated with the group. If her name doesn't ring a bell, I double envy you not even being involved in these toxic cesspools. Congratulations. So here's one example email that I received yesterday, in fact. Dear David, Charlie Kirk needs to be brought down. Every year, someone from the progressive media challenges him, and every year I know it's not going to go well. Hassan Piker looked like a rebellious teenage punk saying F you to his conservative father. Sam Cedar evaded questions and looked easily fumbled and ill-prepared. And now Kyle Kulinski. As much as I love Kyle and think he does great work, I knew as soon as I saw the announcement this was going to be bad for reasons you yourself, I'm sure, surmised, so I won't go into them. And sure enough, while goofy and funny and throwing a few good punches, I do not think Kyle did well in this debate. He was visibly nervous, kept pacing around his podium, evading questions, and letting Kirk ramble on his sales pitch with no interruptions. It's like none of these people did their homework to find out what Charlie's talking points would be and just thought, psh, Charlie Kirk, that moron, that liar. Yeah, I can take him on. I know my stuff. That's why I know you would be different. I know it would take a lot of work, but you understand what it's going to take down Charlie Kirk. And I think you're the only one with the disposition to be able to do it. You know his debate tactics, throw out a ton of misleading facts and half-truths in a quick amount of time, knowing a few of them are bound to stick. He's got at least a dozen shotgun shells of information ready to go at a moment's notice. He is not to be underestimated. He is really smart and has an obvious good memory, and you're the only progressive I can think of that can match him. So I'm begging you, David, for the sake of the progressive movement that I see getting damaged every year by this a-hole, take this effer down. You're our only hope, says John. So let's go through this in pieces. Charlie Kirk has debated at Politicon Hassan Piker last year, Sam Cedar last year, I believe, and Kyle Kulinski this year, just a few days ago. I've not seen any of these debates other than 5 minutes of Hassan versus Charlie in Los Angeles during last year's Politicon. I saw the part where Cenk Uygur, Hassan's uncle, was yelling at Charlie from the audience. And otherwise, it was just Charlie and Hassan yelling at each other. I have no idea how the debate went with Kyle over the weekend. But what I'm hearing is that people are saying Sam, Hassan, and Kyle didn't debate well and didn't look good. And David, you would do better. I don't know that I would do any better. I don't really have any reason to think that I would do any better than Sam, Hassan, or Kyle in the debate format. I'm flattered that John and a few other people who emailed me think so. I actually think that the problem is the debate format. The Politicon debate format is either no moderator or, like a showpiece moderator who doesn't really moderate with, and this is important, a crowd that reacts to the basest, lowest common denominator talking points and starts to interfere in the debate. So I believe the problem is the debate, because when one side cares about facts, Hassan and Sam and Kyle, generally speaking, care about facts, at least as they see them, right? And the other side cares about gotchas and optics and kill shot moments and repeating the same tired talking points that are meaningless, but they are effective in front of a live audience. You are at a fundamental disadvantage. And so I don't know that I would do any better. In fact, I may do worse because I am more suited to a different type of debate. So to really debate these people, you need to be able to go in depth without interruption from the audience and without the next talking point derailing everything. You need a formal, controlled format that bores a lot of audiences, sadly. It's not going to create an event that will get Politicon to shell out the checks of, $10,000, $15,000, $25,000 per invited speaker or debater as they do now. I don't know if people know, but we get paid to go to Politicon. So would I debate Charlie Kirk? I mean, I guess maybe. Would I do better than Kyle, Sam, and Hassan? If the format is the same, I don't know that I do any better. But my focus, and I've said I have a story to tell about me not being at Politicon this year, and a big piece of it was I had this emergency appendectomy, but there is more to the story. I'm really trying to focus on the important stuff and productive conversation. I want to be talking to people who have read philosophy and political theory, not people who repeat the talking points that Candace Owens feeds them, right? I think if I'm making myself clear, I think that's the best way to sort of elucidate it. Let me know what you think. Why engage in debates with bad faith participants when the format will not allow you to actually expose them for the intellectual frauds that they are? Let me know what you think. We have a voicemail number. That number is 2192-DAVID-P. This is funny. It's actually kind of good news. We've not heard from previously drunk, furious Trumpist Jimmy from Philly for a while, but he is requesting a name change. Take a listen.
David, Jimmy from Philly.
Yeah.
From now on, since I've stopped drinking, I demand you refer to me as the furious psychonaut Trump supporter. Right. It's no longer the drunk Trump supporter because I'm not drinking anymore. But psychonaut would be the appropriate term.
Okay, so Jimmy, I don't know. I'm glad that you're not drinking anymore because the drinking was becoming a problem. Jimmy was having on some nights that he would call into the live streams. I don't remember if it was 4 or 6 of like a very high alcohol percentage IPA and India Pale Ale for the uninitiated, which, by the way, who likes super hoppy beers? Give me a break, but that's a story for a different day. And I think they were like 11%. So he was having like 4 to 6, which I believe is like 8 to 12 normal beers. If a normal beer is like 5%, I think some of those like, water beers like Bud Light are maybe even like 2 or 3%. This guy was putting down a lot of alcohol. So I'm glad that you're not drinking. I think Psychonaut might be a reference to the fact that Jimmy now does LSD. I don't know if that's a code word for someone who does LSD. But in any case, Jimmy seems more lucid when he calls in. And for that, I think we can all be grateful. We've got a great bonus show coming up for you today. Democratic Congresswoman Katie Hill is resigning because of allegations of improper relationships with staffers. We will talk about that. The police officer who was told to tone down his gayness, their word, not mine, has been awarded $19 million in a discrimination lawsuit. And a big gap, a chasm or chasm, depending on something, has opened up on the issue of reparations, where 75% of African Americans support reparations for slavery, whereas only 15% of white Americans do, according to a new poll. And we are going to dig in to a lot of what is going on with that issue on today's bonus show. Please get today's bonus show. The bonus show is for members and patrons. You can get instant access at davidpakman.com/membership or by becoming a patron at the $5 a month or greater level at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.